Good evening. The date is May 6th, and I am going to be reading and summarizing information from the Tara Holmes journal article in Perspectives called PBLA, Moving Towards Sustainability. This was published in 2015 in the Tesla Canada Journal, Volume 32, Issue 9. Okay, so from the article, the introduction of portfolio-based language assessment into federally funded language instruction for newcomers to Canada is a major national initiative. This comprehensive approach to classroom-based assessment, aligned to the Canadian Language Benchmark standards, incorporates current perspectives on assessment and draws heavily on assessment for learning research and principles. Now, PBLA was initially undertaken by CIC, or Citizenship and Immigration Canada, now known as IRCC, in response to several studies on language training in Canada that recommended a language-based assessment protocol be introduced in federally funded English as a second language training programs for adults across Canada. Now, CIC set out to establish an assessment approach that would support learning, introduce a common standard of practice, and improve CIC's ability to determine the impact of language training in LINK programs. So CIC had three initial goals or objectives. They wanted to create an assessment approach that supported learning, introduced a common standard, and gave them a better ability to determine the impact of LINK programs. So in 2009, they got Joanne Pettis from Labor and Immigration in Manitoba to develop a national portfolio language assessment approach that was modeled on an existing provincial initiative that was happening at the time. And this first step eventually led to the development of a project team, which included two leads, Joanne Pettis and Tara Holmes, and then several regional coaches who worked together through CCLB to create PBLA. In the early stages of development, the National PBLA initiative was linked to already established principles and the standards of the CLBs. So this approach integrated many of the principles of assessment for learning as developed over the past 2 decades by UK assessment reformers. And this group from the UK became known as the Assessment Reform Group. And their work has led to a broad understanding of assessment, including several strategies that became foundational to PBLA. In a seminal study by Black and William from 1998, members of the group reviewed over 250 quantitative research studies and concluded that innovative formative assessment practices can raise standards and promote effective lifelong learning. The study was foundational to the current understanding that formative assessment and summative assessment are interrelated, and that all assessments should be formative in nature. The Assessment Reform Group made a case for a strong link between assessment and instruction, arguing that assessment has great potential for improving both teaching and learning when embedded directly in instructional practice. 5 key AFL assessment for learning strategies were eventually identified. And those strategies were key to the development and then implementation of PBLA. The first strategy was clarify learning intents and criteria for success. Strategy 2, incorporate classroom activities that elicit evidence of learning. Strategy 3, provide action-oriented feedback that moves learners forward. Strategy 4, active learners to become instructional resources for one another. And strategy 5, active learners to become owners of their learning. Now, Harlan from 2004 and the King's Oxfordshire Summative Assessment Project both found that designing tasks gives teachers a deep understanding of learning goals and criteria, and that this understanding is in turn key to task and assessment validity. So, in other words, allowing the teachers or making the teachers create their own assessments gives them a deeper understanding of the learning goals and criteria and helps with assessment validity. Both the Harlan and COSAP studies also found that the dependability of summative results lies in a shared interpretation of assessment criteria. Both emphasize the value of moderation sessions in which instructors look at learner work together as an important step in developing a shared understanding of standards and related assessment criteria. So, dependability of results lies in a shared interpretation of assessment criteria. In order to foster both task and assessment dependability, PBLA integrates many of these measures. Instructors develop tasks and criteria that align with CLB standards and learner identified interests and goals. They share criteria with the learners. They encourage learner self-assessment and learner reflection, and collect a balance and range of tasks in the portfolios. Instructors are also encouraged to collaborate in the interpretation of assessment criteria and development of their tasks. So PBLA started in a rollout and 2 pilot projects began in 2010 to 2011 in Ottawa initially. And the second pilot project happened from 2011 to 12 in link programs in Edmonton and New Brunswick. So the national rollout of PBLA following these projects has used a train the trainer or a cascade approach. So as it continues to go across Canada, they're using the train the trainer approach. To facilitate this sort of long-term and in-depth integration of classroom assessment practices, the PBLA implementation team is led by 2 project leads and supported by 12 regional coaches, selected for their experience as mentors and expertise in using CLBs and portfolios for classroom planning and assessment. And these coaches support the development of assessment practices at the regional and local levels. So in order to maintain or sustain PBLA, there are 2 project leads nationally, Tara Holmes and Joanne Pettis, and then 12 regional coaches, so like a provincial coach that you can reference or talk to. Okay, so in the early stages of local implementation, so like in your city or in your area's link programs, PBLA is introduced to program administrators through a 1-hour webinar, after which administrators nominate lead instructors from within the program based on classroom skills and expertise in using CLBs and informal leadership qualities. Though I have to say from my experience, this is often just whoever volunteers. And the lead instructors introduce PBLA to their colleagues and support them through the implementation. Large-scale dissemination programs such as PBLA tend out of necessity to be a top-down rather than bottom-up initiative, resulting in fewer opportunities to tailor experiences to individual needs. However, Harlan in 2010 suggests that even in large-scale initiatives, reflective and practice-relevant content and structure can support collaborative learning that enables instructors to put new ideas into practice in their own schools and classrooms. In the implementation of PBLA in individual programs and classrooms, therefore, the goal has been participation by all stakeholders in the exploration of assessment for learning principles applied in practice in different classroom contexts. To introduce PBLA locally, lead instructors and local program administrators plan the implementation process with their regional coach. Lead instructors then introduce PBLA to colleagues over a period of 5 to 7 months via a series of workshops, each of which introduce a key PBLA principle or practice that includes opportunities for instructors to discuss the implementations for their own teaching context. Between sessions, instructors try out strategies in their own classrooms and they share learning and reflections. During this period, lead instructors are again supported through an online forum. Once the workshops have been completed, classroom instructors introduce PBLA into their own classrooms. Now, it depends on where you work and at what stage of PBLA you come in. When Algonquin College started PBLA in 2017, they did 2 hours of training for 12 weeks for all of the instructors that were currently in Link. And those instructors did go through all the PBLA principles by a lead, directed by a lead, and they developed materials and they had 12 weeks to go through. For the people who joined Link in the fall of 2017 and afterwards, the Link lead instructor for Algonquin College can still support them, but they are now given an online course that lasts about 20 hours. And it's mostly self-directed. It lasts for 5 weeks, and there's an online coach, and you are expected to create assessments and go through the key principles and do quizzes and do all these things over the 5 weeks. And when you finish, and if you pass, you get a certificate. And then your local lead, or the lead in your school, is supposed to collect a final PBLA assessment, something you've created, and assess it for you. And then they're also supposed to go through your PBLA binders at the end of the term and discuss with you the things that you created and the things that your students did, and how you can move forward. As you begin to learn how to do PBLA, they have what they call partial and full implementation. If you do partial implementation, you are expected to do 1 to 2 assessments a week, and you will do partial implementation for 1 term. And then full implementation is 3 to 4 assessments per week each term. Okay, back to the article. Holmes et al. From 2007 suggests that if this commitment is to develop, then instructors must be aware of the change being proposed and the evidence for its impact on learner motivation and achievement. Instructors must also perceive that the change will support their teaching. Only then will instructors be open to learning and implementing new ideas, not to mention how it might affect their own practices. So for PBLA practice to be sustained through evolving classroom and system realities, 3 professional learning components will need to be maintained, says the article. Professional learning experiences that encourage the instructors to continue to deepen their understanding of assessment principles and try out new strategies in the classroom. Local and online spaces where instructors can reflect on practice, including their implementations, new ideas and strategies, and collaborate with other instructors who share their engagement in classroom-based assessment. And thirdly, systemic support of professional learning by including administrators in professional learning about assessment innovation, and by seeking continued funding and other evidence of official support for change. Now, I have to say, from my experience, those 3 things in the place where I most recently taught Link were not entirely met. So, looking at sustainable development for PBLA in Canada, AFL studies have also provided a number of specific understandings that have implications, for PBLA. These understandings are summarized here with implications for the sustainability of PBLA. So, instructors, lead instructors, and others need regular opportunities to discuss their assessment practices and learn from each other. Professional development must be continuous, recognizing that effective work requires ongoing commitment. And I have to say, in Ontario, I feel like it's been really pushed. Tutela has done a million things on PBLA, and so has TESOL Ontario. And there are many, many resources now. Lots of webinars, lots of resources teachers can access to get help and ideas with and for PBLA. Number 2, instructors must see what they're doing as worthwhile and consistent with their own and national goals for learning. Instructors and others must have evidence of positive impact on learning. So what they suggest is that instructor action research studies to enhance engagement and deepen professional learning. Impact studies should be done, and research studies should be done that focus on the impact of PBLA. It hasn't been around long enough that they've done many of these things, but I will say that this statement is very true, that the instructors must see what they're doing as worthwhile and get on board with the idea, or PBLA will not work in their classroom. Number 3, the information provided through assessment needs to be useful to and valued by those receiving it. So learners need to be aware of their role in assessment. Studies that gather feedback from learners about the impact of PBLA on their engagement in learning should be supported. So that's something, again, that not all teachers do well, is engaging the learners and having them participate in assessment and understand their role in the assessment. Number 4, there should be consistency between different parts within the whole assessment system. So going forward, broad standard statements of quality practices to aspire to should be developed and agreed upon by stakeholders, classroom instructors, administrators, policymakers, researchers, in order to enhance the shared understanding of the principles of PBLA. They also suggest here the processes for reviewing PBLA guidelines and protocols should be established. An ongoing moderation of sessions should be introduced, and that TESOL education programs should incorporate the development of assessment competence. And I know the TESOL program that I took 2 years ago did have an assessment course, and it was based on the CLBs, which is a great bridge to using PBLA if you end up teaching LINC. And number 5, the necessary resources must be available to sustain and develop practice. In the years ahead, external support needs to be maintained for ongoing professional learning, a PBLA community of practice, and the development of materials and resources consistent with PBLA principles to meet changing contexts. And again, I have to say that I do believe that has been done well in the 4 years since this article has been published. All right. Thank you for listening.